From the Hype HQ studio in Chicago, Illinois, it's Startup Hype Man, the podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Raj Nation, and I am the founder of Startup Hype Man. Fast-growing startups work with me because they want to become better storytellers. Whether that's for customers, investors, or a packed audience, they know that story is their ticket to stand out, stand apart, and change the game. And this podcast here is where I talk with entrepreneurs and leaders in the startup ecosystem, ranging from scale stage to early stage, as they share specific strategies that they have executed to stand out across three specific areas: sales, marketing, and people. Before we begin today's episode, remember you can head to startuphypeman.com and subscribe to the newsletter that doesn't suck. You'll get new podcast episodes and timely reads written by me, but also helpful articles from around the web and a notice of upcoming pitch competitions. All right, let's dive in and hear how today's guest is changing the game. Ladies and gentlemen, making his way to the microphone, born and raised and residing in the Chicagoland area, he is the founder of Salesmelon and the author of The Transparency Sale. Please welcome Todd Caponi.
Wow, that is quite an entrance. Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, he is Todd Caponi, and as I mentioned, he is not just he is the founder of Salesmelon and head speaker and trainer there, as well as author of The Transparency Sale, which was a 2019 Best Book Award from the American Book Awards, as well as an international bestseller. But he's got more to his accolades and titles than that. He's also the current managing director of VentureScale by Sales Assembly. And on top of that, he is the former chief revenue officer of PowerReviews, where he built that from the ground up to become the fastest growing tech company in Illinois. It's a mouthful to get out because it is that impressive of a background, Todd. Now, everybody listening, this is the first official work from home recording episode of our new season of the show. All the previous episodes thus far had been pre-recorded before we hit the pandemic. So I wanted to get Todd on, and especially a very timely episode here, because we are going to specifically talk about how to sell during a downturn. We're in this pandemic. There's a lot of market uncertainty. Todd's got a ton of experience in this, and I'm very excited to have this conversation with him. So Todd, first off, welcome to the show, and I want to just ask you off the bat, how to sell during a downturn. Why is this on your mind, and why is it important to you?
Well, it's on our mind because obviously we're living in the middle of it right now.
I suppose, yeah, that's a dumb question on my part.
It's on everybody's mind. And I think that's the thing that, when I try to give advice to people is if you're going to be good in sales, one of the skills or talents that you probably wish you had was the ability to read minds. And like, gosh, if I could read minds, I'd be awesome at selling. Well, it turns out right now, you can read everybody's mind, right? Everybody is living in this world, both personally and then professionally. And so it's actually a great advantage to have, because now in a time like an upswing, your potential buyers could be thinking about 100 different things and experiencing and thinking about investing in 100 different things. Well, right now, there's only 2 or 3 that they can be focused on. And so there is a great opportunity for sellers that hone their focus right now. And so that's why I've been so jazzed up about it.
Yeah, I love it. And we're going to dive fully into this. This is going to be an action-packed episode. Before we get more into this main topic, let's learn a little bit more about your own background. You call yourself a sales and science amalgamator. And before we hit recording, you started to tell me a little bit of how you think about things. So I got to know a little bit about that. But tell our audience, why sales and science amalgamator?
Yeah, I've always been a nerd for decision science, behavioral science, and then learning theory. Like, how do you get information into the brains of people? And so that's always been really exciting to me. And, the book, The Transparency Sale, came from a behavioral science research study around how consumers interact when a website is acting as the salesperson, and how you can take those learnings and apply them to B2B or human-to-human learning. And so the thing that we were talking about before we started the recording is this idea that because I'm such a nerd for this stuff, I actually shy away from reading books on sales I actually every morning I subscribe to a bunch of neuroscience, behavioral science, decision science type journals, and I read at least one research study every morning. I just figure find one that I think might be interesting and try to read it. And then as the day progresses, I ended up hearing things that kind of plug into it. Like this morning, I was reading one on the loneliness of leadership, and how that's typically a lonely role. And then you add to it the economic uncertainty in the climate, and then add to it that we're all having to work by ourselves at home. And we've got this triple whammy going on that. But that's sales and science amalgamator to me is taking science, because there's so much rich data out there and learnings that have yet to make its way into the sales and leadership world. And I'm trying to be one of the people that helps make that happen.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting perspective because I think one of the top traits to effectively sell is a high curiosity quotient, for lack of a better phrase. And that's kind of what you're saying here is you're not looking for the answers, you're looking for the best answers, you're looking for the best questions.
Yeah, I find the data. So, if I see a research study that says that, for example, doctors, all right, so when you have a life-altering health event, let's say you have a heart attack and you go to the doctor and the doctor takes care of everything, and then the doctor sends you home with advice and guidance around making lifestyle changes, right? That's what they do. Guess what percentage of people actually adhere to those lifestyle changes? It's only 30%. It's gotta be
small. Yeah, it's got to say, there's no way it's more than 50.
Right. It's 30%, and that's life or death. So I see a research study on that, and I think, all right, now let's take that to leadership. Right now, what we've done is we've sent all of our sellers and our team members home with instructions that have to do with the life or death of your organization. And it's not even the life or death of me as a human being. But you can imagine that those sales reps are having a really hard time adhering to those lifestyle changes that have just been prescribed by their leader, aka their doctor. And that has tremendous impacts on the effectiveness of sales organizations in this climate where now everybody's remote. So that's just an example of I look at the data and then go, all right, how does that correlate to the types of things that we're thinking about?
Well, speaking of lifestyle changes, we are now a full month. Yeah, just about a full month. So we are recording this on April 7th. And everyone's had about a month now of working from home and more or less national lockdown and quarantines. So as it pertains to lifestyle changes, how have you adjusted your workout routine, if at all?
So what I did, so obviously my gym closed. So my workout routine, I never liked gyms, but I kind of forced myself into starting to like them. But before it, so I'm blessed by this. I actually made investments and created a gym in my basement.
Nice.
And my wife uses it every morning. So she's always been using it, and I've never used the basement one because I always I got used to going to the gym.
Sure.
And so now it's actually the transition's been pretty easy for me to get down there. I just had to put a new Roku on my TV down there so I could at least watch TV. I'm trying to get caught up on the latest season of Ozark right now.
Oh, so. Very nice. Yeah, for me it's been I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend.
Oh man.
I was always I also teach yoga, as you may or may not know, but because of that, I have free membership to 5 different gyms because I'm, either teach there or I have a partnership with them, right? So every month I was getting for free $500 in free gym membership. So I never had to worry about, I need to have a good home setup, right? And so then all this happens, and all we have here is 2 5-pound dumbbells. So I'm trying to figure this out. And I had a personal trainer, and obviously we had to pause through all this, but she wrote up a workout, and it was all different things where 10 to 15 reps. And I'm well, but 10 to 15 reps at 5 pounds. So now I've had to change it, and I'm doing literally 50 rep and 60 rep sets just to get any type of burn in my body. And man, has it been, it's been a challenge for sure.
Yeah, because you're almost frowned upon by taking a walk around the block and going for a run and everything right now. So yeah, it's tough.
Exactly. And then we don't have that much space. Teaching yoga through Zoom has been a new thing now. So like, but even that requires rearranging the whole place to be able to like get the right setup going. And so that's why I've been more or less just avoiding even like doing yoga. And we'll see. I think we're all going to come out of this 15 pounds heavier and all going back
Exactly.
driving to those gym memberships real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dive into really the meat of everything today, and it's how to sell during a downturn. As I mentioned, we are recording this 4 weeks about into quarantine, and we know that at this stage we have, at absolute minimum, another 4 weeks of this. You could probably argue, a lot of people would say it's going to be maybe another 2 months or 3 months of this, though. Let's think about how it affects sales teams in particular. There's a lot of stress being created. I think a lot of fear. Should I even reach out to people? What do I talk to customers about? Am I going to be tone deaf? All those things. So let's start with mindset. If you are on the front lines, you are an SDR, a BDR, an account executive, what mindset should you have at this time?
Well, let's start with, it's all about empathy, right? So I think that everybody needs to like look in the mirror for a second and go, all right, when I personally face a downturn in my personal life, right? I've got economic uncertainty. I've got a personal recession going on. Like, just imagine that that's about to happen. What do you do? Well, the first thing you do is you probably eliminate all of your discretionary spending, right? So if you had a yoga instructor or personal trainer, like maybe you calm that down for a little bit. You need a new couch. It probably can wait. You'll, deal with the one with flies on it for a little bit longer. So the discretionary stops in your personal life. The second thing you do is you look at your essentials, the things that you need, and go, all right, I need them, but I need to extend my runway on them. So there is a subconscious drive to panic. And that's literally what's kept us alive as a species for the last however many millions of years, is we do tend to overreact, which is why you see people hoarding toilet paper. But they're trying to extend their runway. They say, hey, listen, I'm going to buy in bulk to save some money and make sure I've got the essentials for as long as I need them. And then the third thing you do is you eliminate risk. So you look at all of the ways to make sure that you're safe and that you don't expose yourself to circumstances that are going to make the worst case a reality. So that's in your personal life. Well, now let's think about that from a human to human selling perspective. Number one, everybody you're selling to is a human being. And as it turns out, they're all dealing with the exact same things. We're all kind of in a personal uncertainty, a personal recession right now. And so the people that you're going to be reaching out to are dealing with those exact same things. They're removing discretionary, extending runway on the essentials and removing risk. But then those people you're talking to are also doing it in their businesses. So when we talk about you could have a million things to be focused on during an up market, in a down market, you're only focused on those three things. So the first thing that sellers need to do is to have extreme empathy and understand that you're selling to human beings, and those human beings in their personal lives and their professional lives are doing the exact same things that you are probably doing in your personal life. So that's number one. Number two is then to take a look, and this may, if you're a salesperson, get with your marketing team, but you've got to hone your message on, again, you can read the minds of the people that you're selling to. You've got to hone your message to those three things. If your messaging contains things like, hey, we can get you more leads and we're going to help you get extreme revenue growth. And like, notice I never mentioned revenue growth as something that any of us are thinking about right now. Revenue growth in a market like this is actually a nice to have. So you've got to have extreme empathy and then couple that with messaging that hones to the things that we're all thinking about. Right, those are the first couple of things that come to mind that we all need to be considering to be empathetic sellers. But again, we can read the minds of the people we're selling to. You've got an opportunity to do that, but you've got to make sure that your messaging, that if it was developed during an up market, it's probably not going to work in a down market. So you've got to make that adjustment right now.
Yeah. And, to your point of having the empathy, which is so important, it's what I've been preaching for the last month. And I think, you have, and pretty much any sales leader has been talking about the importance of empathy with good reason. And the funny thing is that it's like, you should have that anyways, even like regardless, you should always have empathy if you want to like effectively get your message out there. But I think there's a misunderstanding between having empathy doesn't just mean opening an email by saying, "Hey, hope you're staying safe." Our company helps software providers generate more leads, X, Y, and Z, right? There's a lot more than just the intro line that says, "Hey, hope you're safe right now."
Right. Yeah. It's, there's in the book, I actually have a screenshot of my inbox of there's like 30 emails that I'd gotten in a row that were from salespeople, and it literally looks like white noise. The first thing to think about with regards to what you just said is that we all need to be cognizant that everybody's inbox has both the subject line and a preview of the first 10 words, right? And if you're saying what you just said, you're still going to be white noise because everybody's saying that. "Oh, I hope everything's okay. I hope you're staying safe," all that kind of stuff. I'm just an advocate of, you've got an opportunity in those first 10 words of the emails that you send out to stand out. And the way you do that is to be a giver and to be personalized and make it valuable. And what I mean by that is, how do you optimize those words to make the point that it's specific to you as an individual and it's meant to be helpful? So think about those first 10 words. I mean, back in the up market, I'll give you an example, and I haven't brainstormed on really good ones in a down market, but in an up market, I remember I had all these emails that started with, I wanted to see if you were interested. I wanted to see if you had 15 minutes. I wanted to, or the guilt trip ones, which are, "Hey, I tried to reach out before," or "I wanted to make sure you got my last email." Like, "All right, thanks for the reminder as to why I didn't open the last email." But as
if it ever happens that like your previous email actually wasn't received. Like, it's this technology. Like, there's like a 0.1 chance that your email didn't go through somehow.
Well, yeah, it's always funny when you think about people saying, "Oh, I wonder if it got lost in the mail." The post office doesn't lose mail anymore. Like, it's the same thing with email. It doesn't get lost. Maybe it ends up in a spam folder. But I remember as the CRO of PowerReviews, I got a couple of emails in a row that stood out. One being, "Todd, here is a study of what SDRs are making in the Chicago market." So that was the preview. And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." I opened it up and it said, "Hey, we noticed that you just posted new SDR openings on your website. Thought this could be helpful." And I was like, "Where's the sales pitch?" "There's no sales, but this is great." Like, "That's awesome. Thank you." And then a couple of weeks later, after my quarter ended, they sent another one that said, "Todd, here is a board template for that CROs are using to help speed their time to board preparation." And I opened it up, and that's exactly what it was. And I was like, "All right, who are these guys?" And then I went into the signature, and so I think that those are just examples of how do you stand out in a personalized way in those first 10 words, make it valuable, and then get rid of the sales pitch. Just be a giver in this market, and you'll draw people to you if you're constantly being seen as a resource instead of somebody that's there to try to sell you something.
So it's an interesting take, especially as you think about, you think about empathy, and the natural default reaction is, okay, I need to start this by saying, "Hey, hope you're doing okay, well, healthy, whatever, safe." And at the same time, like you said, you have that email preview, right? You can only see the first 7 to 10 words. If it's on mobile, I think it's even less than that. And so if everyone's email says hope is the first line, right? Or I hope, or are you, those kinds of things. It's effectively the same thing happening because you just sound like everyone else. So in that case, what is a more effective way? And you mentioned, obviously personalize, make it sincere. But if we were going to, why don't we hypothetically craft an email right now?
Well, I'll tell you.
Yeah, go ahead.
We could probably dig into that. We could brainstorm around it. Can I before we jump to that?
Sure.
I want to give a couple of other pieces of advice for salespeople right now, because there's obviously you've got to optimize the messaging, right? Because no one's going to open your email if it looks like every other email. Or if it's self-serving and appears to be tone deaf. There's a couple other things that I want to make sure I get out there. The second thing is, once you engage with a potential buyer, think about right now, you're desperate. You're trying to extend your runway on your essentials. If you see something that maybe you potentially need, but that salesperson is making you do a lot of the homework, making it really hard on you. Right now, the priority is those three things, right? Eliminate discretionary, extend runway on essentials, and reduce risk. But it's got to be easy. So I think salespeople need to be looking at ways to remove friction from their buying journey. That's so important right now. And what that means is, number one, obviously I'm biased. I wrote a book called The Transparency Sale, but the reason that the transparency sale works is because when you're transparent and you lead with your flaws, you reduce the amount of homework a buyer needs to do to look, see through your BS. Because if all you're doing is presenting your products as perfect, buyers, our brains subconsciously, we know that not to be the case. So we go do homework on our own, which is why analysts exist and reference exists. And if you're in the tech space, G2.coms and Trust Radius exist, and why Glassdoor exists with their reviews from current and former employees. Because sellers normally paint this picture of perfection and then force the buyer to go do the homework. I think there's a tremendous opportunity right now to lead with transparency and help do the homework for the buyers, meaning, hey, you might need this. Here's why you might not. Here's some of the things that could go wrong, but here's the things that are helping companies in this climate that are a lot like yours. And just make buying easy. Also, eliminate steps from the buying journey. If right now you're still one of those companies that does a discovery call, a discovery and qualification call before a demo, and like you got to earn the right to a demo, stop it. You have to stop that right now. Give a buyer what they need. Just give it. Give, and stop doing the gated type selling, because again, if you add steps to the buying journey right now, buyers are going to find other stuff to work on that are easier wins. And then the other piece around this is thinking about the buyers. In a consensus sale, consensus selling is really hard. Imagine now that your buyers are all working by themselves in their homes. They can't even walk down the hallway to go talk to the consensus team. So you've got to make buying easier. You've got to make your contracts easy. Remove any one-way language that you have in your contracts, like one-way language meaning like auto renews that have notification clauses, or auto at renewal time, the price goes up every year by 2.5% or whatever the heck you do. You've got to remove all of that. You've got to negotiate transparently, and you've got to make implementation look super easy. So those are all pieces of this. You got to stand out in the inbox, but then make the buying journey and the implementation journey as easy as possible. Otherwise, other things are going to get prioritized.
So really, we've got three phases here to summarize what you just said. Getting people's attention is phase one. Communicating with them once you have their attention and still being able to generate interest is two. And then three is the process of purchasing what you have to sell.
Yeah.
And how do we make all these things have more, really at the end of the day, how does each step of this have more empathy for the person on the other end? Okay. So with that framework, let's do like a deep dive then into each category here. Mm-hmm. So let's think about the messaging, right? We said before, if we just start every email with "hope you're doing well" or "hope you're safe," it's going to be the same noise that everyone else is sending. But we do want to be personal and sincere, but we don't want to be tone deaf, right? And then I'm going through the mind of like an SDR or an AE right now, right? Like it's like, oh my God, but you said this, but then I have to do that, and how do I do this and do that, right? Some of the things I've been working on with my clients and the teams I've been working with is figuring out like the nuance of this, right? So if we are going to create a hypothetical example here of like, let's say we've got like payroll software or benefits software, and we're selling to an HR leader, and we're trying to craft this email to the head of HR or the VP of HR. And we can't start it with, "Hey, hope you're doing well," or "hope you're safe." How do we start this email while not coming off as like, does this person even know what's going on in the world right now?
Yeah. So payroll software, you're selling it to HR. Yeah. So I think, the first step we need to take is selling to HR payroll. One thing that I'm a huge advocate of in a downturn, by the way, because it helps with this, because you don't have to recreate the wheel every single time. One of the things that 12 years ago when I was running sales for a tech company during the Great Recession, they called it, is we practice something called extreme focus, which means we're going to pick a vertical, firmographic vertical, meaning it's a type of company in terms of their geo, their vertical, and their size. And every rep is going to focus on that for the next 2 weeks. And so what we did is we didn't just choose manufacturing, we choose aerospace. And then we created our messaging around aerospace. And then within that, we were going after VPs of manufacturing. So we created messaging that was pinpointed to VPs of manufacturing of aerospace, and everybody focused on that for 2 weeks. Now with some of my advisory clients, like I've got one advice, and by the way, what that did is we went from a company that was about to go out of business to growing 400% year over year. We sold Boeing, we sold Cessna, Gulfstream, and then we slowly moved out and went to oil and gas, and then automotive, and then we kept, and it just allowed us to steamroll everything. So I would advocate for that, to go, all right, what we need to do is go not only just sell payroll to HR people, but what is the vertical and what is the company size, so that we can figure this out once and then spend the time honing our account list to make sure that we're hitting everybody with something that we think is going to resonate really well.
And like I think one of my advice. Yeah, well, let me just jump in here. I think even within that, it's not that you like hyper segment, or yes, you hyper segment down to like the vertical type and the company type, but then even within that, it's like, okay, now of these company types, which are the companies that are probably doing well right now versus which are the companies that are probably really struggling right now? And then you have to pick based on specifically like what your product is, which is the better market to go into, and how do you position appropriately, right?
Well, yeah. And I think, so one example is there's one of my advisory clients, they're hyper-focused right now, not only on apparel, but shoes. Why? Like, why did they pick shoes? Well, one of their biggest clients is in the shoe vertical, and they went and interviewed that shoe client to find out, like, how is this helping you? And then what are those things that are helping you that are specific to in this environment? Right. And then so they learned from that one. I don't remember. It might have been Crocs. And then like they learned from Crocs about like what specifically their technology is doing to help that organization in this uncertainty. And then they use that to craft their messaging to go after 40 other apparel shoe companies. Right. And so like that's the way you do it. You shouldn't be sitting in a room with a bunch of SDRs and your SDR leaders like contemplating like, hey, how can we help? Figure out who your clients are that you're helping in a great way. Figure out which of those things you're helping them with are applicable to this environment, and then use that as your means to craft that personalized and valuable messaging right now.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too that comes with that, and this is what, with some of my clients that I'm working with right now, what we've been doing is looking at, and to be honest, this is my strategy regardless of the conditions, but I think it applies even more so here, is can you frame this in a way where you talk about what other people who are just like them are doing right now, are thinking about right now?
Exactly.
Should have turned off my phone notifications. So, my formula is always KPASA, problem, approach, solution, action. Plus you add some personalization and some proof in there too, but generally the meat of it is that. And so the way we've been kind of structuring a lot of these emails is saying like, hey, we've been talking to other blank at, insert company type. Here's what they've been telling us there is on their mind right now. And then you have like that statement of what they're telling us. Here's what we're doing for companies like them. Thought it might make sense to reach out to you. Right. And then that's the general gist of the email, but effectively, and you tell me if you think that's not the right approach, but effectively my belief there is you have empathy if you're able to say, here's the situation others like you are facing right now, while not directly emailing and accusing that person of being like, hey, you're terrible at your job. And then it creates a natural lead into the solution, which you don't even have to actually say that much about if you've appropriately captured their situation up front.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. Start with that. Start with the almost make it a prediction. And I'm obviously an advocate for being humble. Starting an email with like, hey, I can a guess that this is probably what you're dealing with. And here's a way to think about it.
Yeah.
Right. And, oh, by the way, we can help you get there. But I'm just, for me, I'm just a big advocate for giving, right? Like, hey, here's some just advice. Yeah. You're probably dealing with this. Here's a way to think about it. And if you need some help with that, we're here to help. Right. Mm-hmm. And then go to this link and check out this shoe company or this aerospace car, to see what they're doing. But make it really easy and just kind of ease up on the sales pitch and be more of a giver.
Yeah. Last summer, I should send this to you. I don't know if you'd seen it before, but last summer I released a short ebook on this thing. I called it the X to Y paradox. And I think crazy enough, I think it applies more right now than ever before. And it was on using case studies in your outreach, like referencing examples of success. And because you mentioned before, with the whole transparency sale methodology, it's admit flaws, talk about where you're good, but where you're lacking. And my whole philosophy of the X to Y paradox is that when you look at people who send cold emails, oftentimes you will get their best 1 to 3 examples of success in that email, where they're like, hey, we helped so-and-so grow revenue by 600% year over year. And the idea here, in my estimation, is that they're currently in a state of X, and you giving that 600% growth example is a state of Y, and that's just too far of a gap to bridge to get them from X to Y, because they kind of like being in X.
That's interesting.
Right? Yeah. So then my approach to that is, okay, so what's going to get them to actually be more interested? Because if you show them the best example, especially if they don't even know you yet, if it's a cold outreach, to me, and you have all the decision science, so I'm curious to get your thoughts here. To me, the layman's term is it activates the yeah, but brain, where the brain says, yeah, but what did you have to fudge to make that sound good? Or, yeah, but that could never work for us. Our situation is unique and different. That's kind of the inherent thought your mind goes to.
Yeah.
So I'm an advocate that you share an X+1 example, which is just an incremental gain versus where they are today, because now it's believable and they are more likely to have the conversation. But I think specifically during a pandemic, a downturn, whatever we call it, I almost think it makes even more sense because, like you said before, big revenue gains or whatever the thing is not going to sell right now. Whereas more risk protection or risk avoidance is going to sell, which inherently is a calmer example of success if you're going to throw that out there.
Yeah. And extending your runway. Exactly. So, here's the data. And it started by looking at the way that consumers look at reviews when they buy stuff online. Right? That, 96% of us now look at reviews before we buy anything of medium to high consideration that we haven't bought before. But the mind-blowing stat is, number one, 82% of us go right to the negative reviews first. So when you're looking at a new refrigerator, you don't actually read the 5s. You want to read the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s and go, all right, subconsciously, we're wired to try to predict what our experience is going to be like. And if all we hear is perfect, we subconsciously know that perfect doesn't exist. So we go right to the negatives, right? But then the mind blower was, for me, when an average review score is between a 4.2 and a 4.5 on a product, that product sells at a higher conversion rate than any other score, including a 5. So a 4.2 sells better than a 5. Right. And it's, again, and that's in general, different categories have different scores. Car seats for children, the score skews higher. Books, it skews higher. Some others, it skews lower. But the bottom line is, we are wired as human beings to do exactly what you just said, the yeah, but, right? That if all I see is perfect 5s and, oh, wow, hey, this does, this will change your life. That doesn't apply to you subconsciously, and you try to seek out why are the reasons why this won't apply. And so that's why leading with that makes the buying brain not only click into trust much faster because you're laying it on a foundation of trust, but it also satisfies the brain's desire to predict what their experience is going to be like. So while you might be able to claim in an email that, hey, we can give you 600% growth, maybe there's a combination of the two, that there's 600% growth for our best customer, but this is their circumstance. For your circumstance, we're seeing ranges like this. And like that could be your X to Y. Like I love that X to Y paradox. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, and it's cool that you now to have decision signs backing it as well. But
right, and it turns out all of that applies to human selling. It's because when a website is acting as the salesperson, imperfection sells better than perfection. The same thing happens in human to human selling. I started trying it while I was CRO, and like it was freaking magic. Sales cycle shrinking. Our win rates went way up partially because we were working deals that we should win, and we make it really hard on our competitors. And so all of that applies to basically any type of sphere of influence that you might be trying to impart on others.
Well, and I read your book Transparency Sell last fall, I think, and I think I immediately recommended it to 5 people.
Thank you.
So it's funny because what you just said there, like, I started implementing a couple of those things myself where, I'd get into, deeper level discussions with potential clients. And whereas previously I was trying to almost be like, yeah, I can touch on that thing too, if we work together. I just started being like, that's not my lane. Here's what we're going to focus on. And we're going to do this part really well. But you're going to need to, I would recommend you pull in someone else or use someone internally for this other thing. Whereas previously, I was trying to be like, yeah, I can do that too, of course, and I started to find the conversation. It's almost like you feel, and I'm sure you probably have a story or two from your time doing this live with Power Reviews. You can almost like feel the energy in the room shift and like facial expressions change when you get to that level of realness with them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've got lots of B2B examples, but the one B2C example that always jumps out to me is IKEA. Like, IKEA is the #1 furniture retailer in the world for the 9th straight year. And the experience is a freaking nightmare. Like,
I used to work, my high school job was at IKEA. My summer job was at IKEA, by the way.
Yeah. And like, imagine you go into an IKEA and you're like, I need some designer to help me design my room. Then I'm going to need the furniture delivered to my home, assembled. And they'd be like, all right, cool. Go to Room and Board, go to Macy's, go to Crate and Barrel. IKEA is known for creating an experience where you have to find the products, you got to write the code because you're going to the warehouse to pick it and to pack it onto a cart that doesn't have brakes, which seems like a massive oversight, right? And then you got to jam it into your car, Tetris style, drive home with injuries, open the box. There's 150 parts that don't have any words on the work instructions.
That's the worst part, no words.
Right, yeah. And then you F-bomb your way through that assembly, and when you're done, you're like, oh, you know what? We should have bought the end tables with this bedroom set. And it's crazy, but I think in all of our businesses, we need to embrace this idea that we are not all things to all people, and that we should understand, hey, what is our modern Scandinavian design furniture that we didn't pay a lot for, which is IKEA's value proposition? And then what's going to be you're going to have to find it, pick it, pack it onto a cart, jam it in your car, and assemble it. Yeah. And understand that, embrace that, because that helps buyers make faster, better decisions, more confident decisions that they don't end up returning because the expectations have been set the right way. And in this down climate right now, we've got to remove friction from the buying journey. And part of it is to help the buyers predict what their experience is. And transparency is the way you do that.
Yeah. And I think the other part too of the IKEA model is that, because my last place, bookshelf IKEA, it was actually very similar to the one that's in your place right now. Where it's like that, like ladder with like slats coming off of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
TV stand, IKEA, coffee table, IKEA, and what's really funny is the first graphic in the terrible instructions, where it's all like cartoon drawings, is the person trying to do it himself and being like frustrated and everything's broken. And, exactly. And I'm like, and I still tried to do it myself. And then I was like, okay, well,
every time, exactly.
Even as, it takes like 10 hours to get through all that stuff, but the satisfaction when you finish that, because you're like, oh my God, I made it through all that. You have almost like, even though it's like IKEA, you didn't pay a ton for it. You have a certain level of like pride almost in the fact that you made it through that bear of a assembly process.
Exactly.
So, and by the way, the other thing that's funny about you mentioned with the review sites, which was kind of the genesis for Transparency Sale. After I read your book, I started paying attention to, like, my girlfriend is an obsessive review shopper. I'm the one who will just be like, oh, it looks cool, I'll get it. And she'll be like, no, look at the reviews. And what's really funny, to your point, is the first thing she will do is jump to the negative. She scans past all the positive reviews to find the first negative review. And then we'll go down the rabbit hole of what are all the other negative reviews.
Exactly. That's what the data was showing, that 82% of us do that. So, and I know I do that. I'm like, I've already got the perfect 5 speak from their marketing department. That's what drew me in. Now I want to see what the thing really does and try to, and then the other thing about it, for anybody that has negative reviews on their products, a lot of times people get really upset by that, but it helps. And, we're all wired to be able to read a negative review and go, all right, would that even apply to me?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're reading a restaurant and a restaurant review and they get all 5s and 4s for their food, but then there's 1s and 2s for this one waitress or one waiter. Like that,
right.
The service was really terrible, and they were so busy. It was a Friday night at 8:00, and I'm like, all right, I'm going on a Friday at 5, and that waiter probably won't be the one I have. So if the food's great, so I mean that's what we do with negatives. So embrace the negative reviews in your own organizations. But part of the advice is, especially if you're in tech, go do a Google search of what is it like to work with my company, and obviously replace your company name with my company, and see what you find, because buyers are doing that.
Mm-hmm.
What's amazing is that the larger the organization, the first thing that comes up with almost every one of those Google searches is Glassdoor. So before it, and again, that's saying what is it like to work with, not work at, but Glassdoor reviews show up with a rating snippet that shows the star rating and how many reviews there have been. If you don't think buyers are looking at that, you're mistaken. Buyers are not just buying your products and services. They're buying your people. They're buying the relationship they're going to have with you as a vendor. And they're looking at Glassdoor scores to see like, hey, what's the culture like there? Is it toxic? Do people hate each other? Are they cool? So that's part of how you start to collect the reality of what your pros and cons are, is you really should try to make that match what a potential buyer is going to find when they do their own homework anyway.
Part 2 of your framework on how to sell during a downturn is to reduce friction in the sales/buying process. Before we get into that, though, I just want to take a step back to let our listeners know about a new sponsor partner of the show in Sales Hacker. So if you're a longtime listener here, then you know that I try to feature a more B2B slant on the show. And specifically right now, given the economic conditions, I think sales is more important than anything else, and why I have someone like Todd join the show. And Sales Hacker is the world's smartest community for forward-thinking B2B professionals. 135,000 members deep, which means if you're a CEO right now, or a head of sales right now, or a SDR, or a BDR, account executive, any one of those levels, Sales Hacker is going to help you right now get better at your job, plain and simple, with things like podcasts, articles, webinars, and research from actual sales experts and practitioners, including yours truly, Todd. Maybe you've even actually contributed to Sales Hacker in the past. I don't know.
Can I tell you that they just came out with their list of, I think it's like the 90-something best sales books of all time. Yeah. First book on the list, my brother. There
Damn, you made number 1. Oh my God.
Well, it was the first one. I think it was listed. I don't think it was listed in stack rank order, but it is the first one up. Yeah. So, but it's on the list right on top.
Awesome.
So I was pretty proud of that. Yeah.
So today's guest is now been featured on Sales Hacker as one of the 90 best sales books of all time. So that's how valuable the information they're pushing out is. And I love what they're doing there. It's funny, like literally a webinar I did back in December with Sales Hacker. They just published on replay earlier this week, and I had like 10 people being like, hey, that was really good. And I was like, where did you even see this? So get in tune with Sales Hacker. I love that they're a partner of this podcast now. It's at saleshacker.com, and you can get access to everything that we mentioned there, and including the 90 best sales books, as Todd just mentioned, and maybe get a link to that transparency sale at saleshacker.com. So today we're with Todd Caponi, author of Transparency Sale, founder of Sales Melon, as well as like 9 other things that you've got going on in your life that are all impressive. The topic is how to sell during a downturn. We are 1 month into pandemic season, if you want to call it that. So we've identified the 3 parts, Todd, to your framework of how to sell during a downturn is number 1, update your messaging. Number 2, reduce friction in the sales/buying process. And then number 3, make the ultimate buying of it much easier. So let's talk about part 2 now, reducing friction within the sales process. You mentioned earlier when you alluded to it that, if you're trying to like qualify people on discovery to get to a demo, just shrink it all into one call. Do you think it's still appropriate to actually have that discovery up front, or should people just be going straight into demonstration?
Well, that's part of what I talked about with regards to extreme focus too. That if you take your organization's target list and you go, hey, we're going to get very extreme on our firmographic focus, meaning the company sizes, the verticals, and the geos of the companies that we're going to go at, and then the demographics of the individuals we're trying to target, I'm hoping that you shouldn't need to do much qualification. You shouldn't have to do much discovery, because you should just be like, hey, I'm here to help. And here it is. What do you think? And here's the pros and the cons. Like really, when talking about that, transparency is part of part 2, removing friction from the buying journey, which is helping them predict what their experience is going to be like. But yeah, if you've got extreme focus in the types and of companies and individuals you're going after, I'm hoping that your messaging is tight to them, where you're just like, here it is. Is this something that you want or not? Versus, I need to understand whether I'm spending time with the right person, because hopefully you've done your homework beforehand. So that's part of trying to reduce those extra steps, because discovery is about making sure that what I'm going to talk about is appropriate for you as a potential buyer. With focus, you should know that 80% of the way there.
Well, it's interesting because that really that really almost like sings the praises, in effect, of how interrelated each of these components are, right? Because if you've done a better job with your targeting and the messaging in your outreach, and they agree to have a meeting based off that, well, now you've basically qualified them, as you're saying, through the outreach. And I totally agree with that. And that's why, actually, I don't know about you, but I guess we're jumping back to messaging for a second, but I'm actually an advocate of like longer emails that just get out the point of, and like give them the information. You got to story tell within it. You can't just like vomit 90 paragraphs, but I've never been the person who's like, your email can't be longer than 3 sentences. Otherwise you've used up too much real estate. I'm like, no, if you like talk about what's going on with them and what you think you can do in a sequential way that makes sense, you actually can get them to read a good amount. And if they say yes to that, then they're like you just said, they've qualified themselves.
Can I give you some advice on that? It's more brain science. So first of all, let's say you're on Zappos and you're looking at a pair of shoes. They got the pair of shoes, and then below it, there's the item description, and you see 3 bullets, it's this, it's this, it's this, and then it fades, and then there's something that says read more. And so if you want to see everything, you can read more, and it just opens up. Why do you think they do that? Well, number one is that our brains seek out ease. And so when you open an email and it reads like War and Peace, your brain literally cries a little bit on the inside. So that's part of why e-commerce does that. And I'm an advocate of doing that in your emails, meaning I think that you do need to keep your emails to 3 sentences, keep them very short, but make it very easy to invite them to more information. Now, you can do that in a couple of ways. You can do that via a link to a landing page if you want. Or one way that actually breaks it up for your brain is to put the bulk of the email below your signature block. The signature block creates a natural break where if you're going to do 3 sentences, do your 3 sentences and then go, hey, I've put a little bit more information below my signature block, and let them scroll down to. So to your point, give them all the information they need, remove friction, don't add steps, but break it up so that their brain doesn't open an email and be like, wow, gosh,
Sure.
This is going to be a homework assignment.
Yeah,
so
and I think
that's one
like
piece of advice.
Of course. And I think part of like the nuance of it is short, quick sentences, lots of line breaks. It's not, like you said, if it looks like a novel, it's going to get closed.
It's homework, right? Yeah.
Okay, so we have the more qualifying email up front. You're not relying on like the 7th email that's a cat meme to get them to say yes, right? They've said
right.
yes. Now you're on this call with them. So what you're advising here is if you did a good job up front, you don't need to go through the discovery process. But should we still be asking like just a couple questions around like, hey, how are you making decisions right now? Like, is that helpful still?
Yeah, as long as it's not meant to make it easier for you to sell. Like your questions shouldn't be qualification around, me questions. They need to be you questions. Like, hey, to make sure that this is going to be helpful to you, I don't know. I think there's questions that you can ask that are going to help you help them more. If you know what I mean there, right?
Jerry Maguire,
I think that's really important. Yeah, versus the like, who's going to be the signature person? Like that kind of questions, stop it. Like get rid of that. Trust that the person that you're talking to can mobilize change in the organization, and find out later if they can't, but you've got to get them excited. Now, there's one other brain science thing that I've got to share here around your messaging. And this was a big one for me. Our brains, and you've probably heard this a few times, but I want to make this very applicable, is that our brains, we actually make all of our decisions in the limbic, which is the feeling and emotion center of our brain. So it kicks off feelings and emotions, and then we use the neocortex, which is the logic layer, to justify it. So decisions are made with feeling. Logic is used to justify. Now, why does that matter? Well, logic is actually polarizing, meaning that if I lead a discussion with logic, with data, with ROI, with facts, with figures, if our brain already has a feeling leaning one way or the other, we will use your data to reinforce our feeling, whether it supports or goes against. An example of that would be like a NASCAR slide. Like this is always my favorite one, but your logo slide on your presentations, like, hey, we're working with this company, this company, this company. It's something that you're so proud of, right? But it's logic. And so if I start a discussion with, hey, we're working with Microsoft and Salesforce and Zendesk and this company, and we've helped them drive this kind of change, right? That's logic. Mm-hmm. If you're going to present that to 10 different people, here's basically what happens. Let's say 5 of those people are receptive to your message. So those 5 will hear those logos and go, oh, cool. Well, if they're good enough for them, they're good enough for us. But the 5 that are thinking that you're full of crap are going to hear those same companies and do the opposite with it. They're going to say, wow, we're going to be a big fish or a little fish in a big pond, aren't we? We're going to get totally lost here. And those companies, none of those sound like me.
Right.
So your logic is polarizing. And so this is why stories are so important to tell. And I joke about watch a couple of reality makeover TV shows and see how they choreograph their episodes, because they actually make it all about the hero. And it's about illuminating things that hero didn't see were issues in their own business. Doing it with empathy, disarming them, especially like Queer Eye on Netflix is the greatest at this, because they do an incredible job of disarming. The person that they're going to help has already volunteered to be on the show. It's not like they're like, you're a disheveled mess. It's, hey, I know I need help. But they disarm, and then they illuminate for that individual some of the things about their world that maybe they didn't realize were causing problems. And then, only then, do they talk about the way forward and the way that they can help. Imagine if reality makeover TV shows all started with, hey, look how great I am. I've helped this person and this person and this person, and this person has 50% more dates. It'd be like, this is the worst reality show I've ever seen. Yeah. Right, exactly. Right. Instead, they make it all about them. Like, hey, why are we here? And then they're like all dancing around, putting on clothes and being themselves, so they know exactly what they're getting. And they're like, hey, your toenails could use a cutting. Like, you could climb a tree with those things. Maybe, and you've got this lazy boy over here that's kind of dirty. If you ever bring somebody over, they're going to be grossed up by it. And so they start to point out these things that maybe the individual didn't realize were contributing to their problems. And then only then do they flow into, here's how we would approach it. Yeah. And I think that's really important for the way that you position your own products and services, is start with them, help them see that maybe you being an outsider with a fresh perspective can bring a different way of thinking about the problems that they're dealing with. And, oh, by the way, here's how we would, approach that. That has a really big impact on your ability to sell and help buyers make better decisions.
Yeah, and we'll have to trade notes and compare frameworks, because I love the reality TV model. The model that I use is actually factors in a few different things from entertainment, but most closely I model off of the Hamilton musical and how they progress through information to get you to the end point of agreeing that a vice president could kill another political leader, but not leave the theater crying about the fact that that happened, and instead leaving talking about the legacy of Hamilton's life, which is exactly what they wanted you to do, because the first words of the play are the curtains open and they ask the question, how does a bastard orphan son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot grow up to be a hero and a scholar? Like, the first words of the play are, how does someone who has nothing become an American hero? And then you leave the theater saying, wow, what an American hero. And it's all through how they were able to tell that story throughout. So we're definitely going to trade frameworks on that.
That's cool.
But what's really key to what you've been saying here in this component is you're going to cut out most, if not all, of your discovery, but that doesn't mean you then bring them on a 45-minute product walkthrough of your screen share, going into your admin tool and all that stuff. It is more a call to tell a really good story. Slides will really help tell that, especially with visuals. But you're helping them feel better about themselves in the process, because we feel better when we hear stories.
Yeah.
And to me, whether downturn or not, the real value of a sales presentation in your sales process is you are testing and finding out, engaging what is the emotional level of buy-in this person has towards wanting to continue the discussion. And if you follow some of these points that you just mentioned, there are almost these little mile markers along the way where it's like, okay, are you bought into this yet? And if they're not, then you don't even need to talk about your software or whatever you're selling, because it's not going to apply to them anyways. But if they buy into that upfront story of the situation being set up and what's going on in the landscape and the need for changing, then there's a logical progression towards what your company provides, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we're right on. That's perfect. I've got nothing to
add. Okay, so that was part 2, reducing friction in the sales process, and we'll kind of have to get through part 3 here relatively quickly. But you talked about as well the third part, make the buying of your product easier. If you're sending out contracts, cut out language. So I actually, I took your advice on this about a week ago, and a contract I sent out, there was typically a clause in there that was if you have to cancel a meeting with me within 24 hours, without 24 hours notice, it was first time is fine, but second time you get charged, I don't know, $250, $500 without 24 hours notice. And I pulled that out of it. And there was one other clause that was, as I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, that is really self-serving, isn't it? I cut that out as well. Right. And then I also let them know, I was like, hey, I removed these 2 clauses to make it easier for you. Got the contract signed within 24 or 48 hours. But I can attest firsthand that, and who's to say if they would have, I'm not saying they wouldn't have signed regardless, but it removed another layer of having to complicate things. And I think that's what you're getting at here, is decomplicate the buying.
Yeah, exactly. lawyers are people too, and they're wired to look at a contract to know that there's going to be some stuff that they need to, they're on guard as they're reading these things. And so I love the fact that not only did you remove them, but you told the client ahead of time that you removed them, because that's disarming for the legal people or whoever's got to read this thing. But yeah, I think if you make your contracts very readable, my contract has jokes in it. I'm trying to make my contract that it doesn't all have to be here for, there for, that, that kind of crap. It's just hey, I'm really excited to work with you. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a partner. I'm going to try to make you look good. I'm going to adhere to your culture and your values. And then there is some legal language around.
Here's the legal stuff.
Right. I'm going to protect your confidentiality. But then that kind of language, that's one way. You just mentioned a great example of that. But what I see a lot in especially SaaS contracts is this auto renewal language, where it's like you have to auto renew. Or auto renew is in here, but you have to tell us 60 days ahead of time if you're going to cancel. Like that kind of language is horrible for multiple reasons. It's always viewed as one way, and maybe you could say it's mutual because it helps us to be able to plan and blah blah blah. But remember that whoever signed the contract, when it comes to 60 days before renewal, they probably forgot it's in there, or whoever signed the contract's not in their role and there's somebody new on it that doesn't know it's in there. So you could either remove that language or put a clause in it that says, hey, we require 60 days notice if you intend to cancel, but our obligation is to remind you 120 days out. And if we don't remind you in writing that that clause exists, then it doesn't exist. Like that kind of stuff to take, if you need to have one-way language in there, make it mutual somehow. But that kind of stuff is going to make again, the buying journey easier, in that the contract process is going to become like you're building trust to the goal line instead of eroding it right when they're about to sign.
Now, what about, to use a term you mentioned earlier on in this conversation, consensus selling, right? Where there's multiple people who have to like buy in. How do you make that part easier? And maybe it's not just at contract level, maybe it's in the second part of the framework of the buying process in general. Yeah. How do you navigate CEO needing to be involved, but he's working from home in North Carolina, and then the CMO needs to be involved, but she's in Chicago, right? So how do you navigate that when there's multiple decision makers who need to be buying into it?
Yeah, I mean, what is a buyer? If you've got somebody who's kind of a mobilizer that you're working on, like mobilizing change, right? So that's who your project sponsor is. All of these pieces together are going to help them get to that consensus sale, because if you just picture what it's like for them, they're going to have to present the pros and the cons to this. They're going to have to present it they're probably going to have to create their own story if you don't give it to them around, hey, this happened, and here's the approach. Like, if you're mobilizing change in your organization, how do you do it? Do you do it with data and figures? If I buy this, we're going to get 50% more leads. Like, no, you're going to say, hey, I recognize that we had this problem, but the problem is broader than I thought. I went and I evaluated these 3 different solutions, and I found one that is going to be really appropriate for what we're trying to do. And the buying journey is going to be really easy. Here's what could potentially go wrong. Here's the implementation process. You've got to arm that mobilizer to be able to tell a story to all of those people versus just laying facts on them, right? Because that's how change happens. But then number 2 is it's something we haven't talked about, and I know we're kind of running long here, but the way that you present pricing has got to be very transparent too. You've got to give the mobilizer a framework from which to talk about pricing, to say, hey, here's what the investment is, and it's based on the amount of volume. We're going to invest in this many users, and they require that we pay up front, and there's a minimum of 1 year commitment to the technology, and they are providing some mutual incentive around getting this thing done here by the end of May. And so you're arming them to be able to tell the story, and for that CFO or CMO or CEO to say, hey, you got to get that price down. That buyer, instead of having to go back and forth, can now say, well, I already know how to get the price down. We can commit to 2 years, or we can accelerate our cash payment, or we can accelerate when we sign, or we could buy a higher volume of licenses, which would bring the whole pie down. It's about arming the buyers to be able to tell stories and to make all the decisions, so that they don't have to keep going back and forth to you like you're buying a car and the rep has to keep running to their manager.
So give them options.
Yeah, give them options, give them a framework, but help them tell the story. I think that's more important than ever. And that story's got to include both the pros and the cons.
Okay, a couple more questions here before we get to our wrap up. Through everything we've discussed with the changes that should be made, how do you feel this, like does it impact, and you're a former CRO, so you were the one who was in charge of building out projections and forecasting and quotas. do we reduce quota expectations on reps? Do we increase them? Do they stay the same? How do those hard numbers and metrics get adjusted?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way that you do quotas, there's a whole formula for it. I mean, the answer is it depends, which I know is the worst answer of all time. But it's got to be based on your revenue projections and your company targets, right? So you establish a line and you say, this is what we have to hit. Now, we know that not every rep is going to stay. We've got reps that are going to ramp. We've got reps that are going to leave. So we need to set the total amount of quotas to just above that number, and then divide it among the reps that we've got. And so, like, there's this whole waterfall procedure that goes into assigning quotas to reps. I mean, a good company should be setting quotas to be at about the total amount of quota that you want all of the reps attainment to get to about 80 to 90% of that. But you know that only 60% of your reps are probably going to hit it. But then you're going to have another percentage of reps that kill it, that do 200%, which is how you get to that 80 to 90. And so quotas are always a result of company targets and where you need to get, because you're trying to drive part of the behavior extrinsically through this quota thing that's basically kind of like a stick. So if, as an organization, most organizations are adjusting guidance right now. And there are some companies that are in harder hit industries are adjusting them down. Some, like Zoom's probably not raising quotas, but there are companies like that are doing really well. So you've just got to look at what is the guidance that we're providing to our board, our investors. And then I believe that you should be adjusting quotas, especially in a market like this, for the companies that are getting hardest hit. Your compensation is one of the things that both extrinsically and intrinsically motivates you. And it kind of goes into this pile called fairness. But if your reps don't feel like the juice is worth the squeeze, that the effort that they're putting in terms of their time, their resources, worth the rewards that they're getting, which is not only money, but it's recognition, it's status, it's freedom, it's family time, it's function. If those things don't match, then they're less intrinsically motivated and they're less likely to perform well. So you've got to work on that fairness element right now, and that's got to be based on what the company is projecting they're going to do.
Let's talk for a second here, and I think we said beforehand, this is like the toughest question, is the companies who have the products or services that are directly tied to industries pretty much on freeze. Travel, live events, others that are just totally like, restaurants, right? So what, if anything, what advice do you have for those companies?
Yeah, it's got to be to think about what this world looks like when it all comes back, and what are the changes that are going to need to be put in place for when it all comes back. So one example, I work with a company that does office check-in systems. So it's the kind of system that, like, when you're going to an office, and then there's a little iPad there and you plug in your name and it takes your picture, and then it notifies the person that you're there to see that you're there, right? It's so like, who needs that right now? There's nobody going to offices. So their revenue went from exploding with growth to zero. And so the advice for them is to go, all right, when this comes back, let's just picture what the new world's going to be like. Are we going to want to control the amount of people or the flow that comes in? Are we going to want to know, do we need to make it touchless, so that you don't have to touch anything when you come in? So is it an app on a phone? They also manage shipping, so that if things come in, it notifies the people of what's there. How do we make sure that this stuff's safe and that we know what's coming in and who's coming in? Does it have to take your temperature? I'm just kind of spitballing here.
Yeah, those all make sense.
It's just though. If you're in the travel space or the event space or any of those things, what can we just picture or imagine the world's going to be like when all of this comes back? Hopefully it comes back sooner than later. And all those organizations need to be ready for it. Is there something you can do to help them be ready for it? That's the thing that jumps to mind immediately.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. And in fact, one of the companies I'm working with right now, they have a product that just really can't be sold right now because of what's going on. and like the product involves like being outdoors and touching things, unfortunately. But what we've shifted towards is actually, first off, the outreach message. Within it, it says, I know you're probably not making any decisions today, but it's helpful to plan ahead. So the whole strategy has been reoriented around planning ahead for when the curve flattens, and what, like you just said, what is this going to look like? And how do you want to be getting, in front of people, or whatever the value prop is, right? Once people are back to doing things, and not stuck inside. So I think we're in alignment there. The other thing I've seen too is, one of my on and off clients, one of the things that they've done is they actually shifted, and this is kind of your earlier point, they shifted entirely their market. So rather than selling into live events, which is what they were doing, and I'm actually referencing here Fan Food, who we had Carson Goodale, their CEO, as a guest last season. They sell in-seat food delivery, like your hot dog and beer, your concession food at live events, at sports, at concerts, which obviously they can't sell. But I thought what Carson and his team did that was so smart was they made an immediate pivot and said, okay, hospital cafeterias, can't have crowding there. You want people to not be standing in lines. Let's do a delivery thing there. We just bring food.
Brilliant.
Right. And I'm like, okay, man, I wouldn't even have thought of that. Like, that is really, really smart to do that. So
that's awesome.
And I think that comes back to your first point, which was like what segment of the market, maybe it's a market you haven't looked at all yet, but what segment of the market deserves your most attention at this time?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for you and I, like, my life, I went from CRO and head of sales of 3 other companies to being a speaker and a teacher, right? And it's all in-person classes. I was booked out for 8 weeks straight. The beginning of March. If you wanted a date in March or April, you couldn't have gotten it. 2 weeks later, I had nothing but openings. Like, it was all gone in 2 weeks.
The only reason we can do this podcast today and you're not like on a plane somewhere is because
it was crazy, right? And then and so I had to shift everything. Like, I had to shift to all virtual. My focus has been on give. I called my top 5 CRO clients, and all I said to them was, I sent this in email. I was like, hey, if you need a safe space to just share strategies with, and I'll beat you up in a safe space if you want. But like, I've been through this before, and you're probably feeling really lonely right now. So just pick a time for my calendar. And so the first 5 that I sent out, 4 of them booked it within 15 to 20 minutes of me sending out the email. Yeah. And then I've had those calls, and each one of them are just like, like, here's what we're doing. What do you think? And just strategizing on it. So I had to shift my complete focus to, the focusing on a downturn. How do you apply different things to that? I changed my website. I changed all of my programs, and I'm doing all of it virtual. I think we're all doing a lot of that. Yeah. But I now have an eye towards, hey, when this thing comes back, what's that changing world going to look like? And how am I going to stand out? And so I'm already focused on those things too. And I think every company should be thinking that way.
Can you let our listeners know where they can learn more about you, where they can find you, where they can get your book?
Yeah, I mean, I think the place that I share the most stuff is on LinkedIn. So you can follow me or connect with me. If you connect with me, please let me know that you heard me here. Just having that, like, versus just the blind ones or the, I noticed we have like connections. Like all those crazy LinkedIn connection requests drive me nuts. Like that, talk about something that feels tone deaf. But follow or connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter at T Caponi. But obviously, the book is called The Transparency Sale. I've got lots of information and ways to connect on at transparencysale.com.
Awesome. What are, to wrap up, we'll each do our top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways for the listeners based on our discussion today. I'll go first, and I'll give it to you. I got to focus on the part that I know best, which is the messaging side of it, the storytelling side of it. So, I mean, if nothing else, I think augment your messaging to fit the times appropriately, and figure out what does a less insanely awesome version of your value proposition look like, and more of a, like you kind of said, the risk avoidance thing earlier? Because, I didn't mention this in this conversation, but it's something I've been writing about, is in a upmarket, most companies are selling to one of the top 3 of Maslow's hierarchy of needs: esteem, belonging, self-actualization. But those only exist if the first 2 exist, which is the first 2 of the pyramid are physiological and safety needs, which are the 2 things that no one has right now. So can you reorient and augment what you're saying to be more in line with protecting a physiological or safety need? That's how you'll find just generally more success in getting people to want to have the conversation in the first place. Todd, top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just practice extreme empathy. Like, know that you're dealing with human beings that are all dealing with the exact same things you are, not only in their personal lives, but their professional lives, which obviously influences their the messaging that you're going to use to communicate with them. But also, ensuring that you're optimizing the journey for them, because knowing that the priorities are different, you've got to make everything super easy. And then that last little nugget that we talked about is maybe I'm in the minority on this, but I'm just an advocate for extreme focus in times like this. It's going to help you hone everything that you do and give you extreme credibility, which they're going to feel. As it turns out, confidence is contagious, and it's going to speed your buying processes considerably. So those are kind of the couple for me.
My final question, which is how we end every episode: fill in the blank. Entrepreneurship is blank.
Oh man, I saw this one and I was trying to think through it. Entrepreneurship for me is, I mean, this is probably cheesy, but it's exhilarating. All right. Like, I just, as the managing director of VentureScale here in Chicago, it's an early stage tech incubator focused on sales and revenue, focused on entrepreneurs that are early stage, like between a seed and an A. And man, I get such a thrill watching the build, and being a part of the build and experiencing that. And then in my own life, I've done this twice myself, and then I've run and built a couple of startups. It's exhilarating to me. And if you've got the runway to do it, my opinion is you've got to try it once or twice, and then you'll be hooked forever. So for me, entrepreneurship is totally exhilarating.
I like that. And I'll tell you, especially during, the current times, it is, I've found it to be, and I think like you, like everyone had some hits they took in some capacity, and it was like a day of feeling sorry for yourself. And then like, all right, what do we got to do to fix this? What do we do to steer the ship in the right direction? And it is as crazy as it sounds. And I don't want to sound insensitive to the situation, but it's like having to figure all this stuff out in real time is like really strangely like exciting, Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird. I'm with you, dude. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like, making the pivot and then like going out and telling my wife about like, hey, this is what I'm doing. This work today. It's fun. It's cool.
He is Todd Caponi, the author of The Transparency Sale. You can find it on Amazon right now. You can also work with him directly through SalesMelon with training and speaking, or you can work with him if you're an early stage company through VentureScale, where he's the managing director. Thank you, Todd, for joining us today on Startup Hype Man, the podcast.
Dude, that was a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
That wraps up today's conversation. Did you like what you heard? Startup Hype Man, the podcast, is available on every major platform, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and more. So be sure to subscribe on your platform of choice and leave a rating and review. Do you want to be an upcoming guest on the show? Email media@startuphypeman.com with your idea, and my team will review. Our theme song is Change the Game by Jay-Z, all rights owned by Rockefeller and Def Jam Records. And hey, if you want to work together on making your startup story the only one that matters, email me at rajiv@startuphypeman.com. That's RAJIV@startuphypeman.com. Well, that'll do it for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you to today's guests for joining. You have been checking out Startup Hype Man, the podcast. I'll catch you next week. But in the meantime, word up, raise up.